The smoke curled upward like ghostly fingers, and the orange flames of Haven House roared against the night sky. Marcus barely registered the shouts around him as he pushed past volunteers and panicked families. Somewhere in the chaos, a small figure was trapped. Diego, a boy who had become more than just a child in need, was pinned beneath a collapsed shelf, coughing, terrified. Without hesitation, Marcus dove into the fire, heat scorching his skin, smoke stinging his lungs, his heart pounding with both fear and resolve. He lifted Diego, shielding him from falling debris, and staggered toward the exit. Outside, the fire raged, threatening to consume everything in its path. Elena appeared like a force of nature, moving with precision and calm, orchestrating the evacuation to ensure that no one was left behind. Marcus watched her, awestruck, realizing that courage was not just in action, but in the quiet authority she exuded. Then Vanessa emerged, confessing her mistakes and offering to help. Together they faced the danger, confronting Victor Kane, the man behind the disaster. Marcus felt the weight of past failures lift slightly, replaced by purpose, accountability, and the raw, immediate stakes of life and death. The fire was no longer just destruction, it was transformation. Every act, every choice in those blazing corridors would redefine who Marcus was, what redemption meant, and how far he was willing to go to protect the people who mattered. The grand vista glimmered beneath a canopy of crystal lights that fell like frozen rain from the vaulted ceiling. Guests wearing silk, velvet, and quiet ambition drifted between marble pillars, unaware that the night would redraw every power line they believed they understood. The ballroom smelled of citrus perfume and polished gold, a deceptive fragrance that masked the storm waiting behind its immaculate gloss. Marcus Vale stepped into the center of the stage with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. His tailored suit shimmered under the warm lights, reflecting the swagger of a man who believed the world bent naturally toward him. By his side stood Vanessa Cruz, young and luminous but tense, as if every breath she took might shatter into dust. The crowd shifted toward them, curious, hungry, already whispering. Marcus raised a hand to command their silence, and the entire room obeyed. He spoke in a tone soaked with pride. He believed he was about to deliver an announcement so grand that no one could dare challenge its brilliance. He announced that Elena Vale was a dutiful wife, yet insufficient for the future he envisioned. He proclaimed that the path forward required Vanessa to stand at his side as a second wife, a decision he considered progressive and strategic. The guests parted around him as though absorbing a shockwave. Some gasped, others forced polite smiles, hesitant to offend a billionaire whose investments shaped half their fortunes. Vanessa lowered her gaze as if ashamed of the role she played in this spectacle. Her hands trembled, her eyes held an unspoken plea that no one in the room cared to decode. She had been raised in a scarcity so brutal that survival taught her obedience. Now obedience had placed her on a stage she never wanted. The tension fractured when Julian Lee stepped forward, a quiet man with sharp eyes, carrying the history of 3 continents in his bones. He had endured a lifetime of exclusion since arriving in the United States as a child. Tonight, he refused to remain silent. He walked into the spotlight not with arrogance, but with the firm dignity of someone who had learned to stand tall against discrimination dressed in subtle forms. The audience froze. Julian addressed the crowd with steady clarity. He revealed that Vanessa was not the angelic muse Marcus claimed her to be, but rather a covert operative entangled with Apex Innovations, a corporation notorious for backdoor acquisitions and industrial sabotage. Julian explained that Apex had exploited Vanessa's poverty and desperation, forcing her into espionage while dangling false promises of freedom. His voice did not tremble, for he carried truth like a blade sharpened over years of struggle against prejudice and dismissal. The ballroom reeled. Some guests stepped back, as if moral contamination might stain the floor beneath them. Others leaned forward, fascinated by the collapse of a man who had once seemed untouchable. Vanessa swallowed her breath and lifted her head. For the first time that night, her shame became visible strength. The truth liberated her from the stage Marcus had forced her upon. At the far end of the hall, Elena watched with silent composure. She stood in an emerald gown that shimmered like a blade drawn under moonlight. Her posture was regal, a quiet warning of storms she had hidden for far too long. She was the heiress to a real estate empire that shaped the skyline of multiple countries, yet she had spent years diminishing herself to fit into the fragile ego of her husband. She had used her mother's surname to blend into anonymity, hoping to find love free from transactional expectations. Now the illusions dissolved with one public betrayal. Elena stepped forward, only slightly, enough for the nearest guest to part in unconsciously reverent waves. Her voice when it came was soft, nearly tender, but laced with unshakable power. She told Marcus that he would soon understand who she truly was. Her words did not rise in anger. They settled instead like the calm before a seismic shift. Marcus felt his control loosening, but he was too stunned to respond. His kingdom was crumbling in real time, and the man who had built an empire on dominance could not comprehend defeat unraveling in front of an audience he had hoped to impress. The room transformed. The whispers sharpened into daggers. Some guests reached discreetly for their phones, eager to chronicle the downfall of a titan. Others avoided eye contact entirely, unwilling to become collateral in a war they had not prepared to witness. Outside, engines thundered like a sudden invasion. Heads turned toward the entrance where the sound grew louder, deeper, almost ceremonial. Moments later, the towering glass doors swung open. 10 gleaming supercars slid to a stop in perfect formation, their metallic bodies reflecting the ballroom lights like forged declarations of power returning from exile. The vehicles belonged not to Marcus, but to the Moretti family, one of the most influential dynasties in Europe, and the true bloodline from which Elena descended. The synchronized arrival of the fleet cast a long shadow across the room. It signaled what no one had dared imagine. Elena had not been abandoned. She had chosen silence. She had chosen restraint. She had decided to give Marcus the chance to be the partner she needed. Now that he had proven unworthy, she reclaimed the identity she once hid to protect her heart. The guests stood motionless, uncertain whether they were witnessing vengeance or rebirth. Elena walked toward the exit, her steps echoing through the hall like the steady drumbeat of an approaching revolution. She did not look back at Marcus. She no longer needed to. The world she carried behind her was greater than the one he had offered. Marcus remained rooted to the stage, hollow, unable to fracture the silence that had swallowed him. Vanessa edged away with tearful eyes, no longer the symbol of his dominance, but the accidental herald of his collapse. Julian watched with quiet respect, knowing the moment marked more than a personal downfall. It signaled the return of a woman who had been forced into the shadows and who now rose with the full force of her lineage and her learned strength. As Elena stepped outside, the engines hummed again, welcoming her like returning royalty. Her expression held none of the anguish Marcus expected. Instead, there was clarity, forged through betrayal and reborn through resolve. She had walked into the darkness for love. She now stepped out of it for herself. The night closed with no applause, only the cold recognition that a queen had reclaimed her throne, and that the empire, built on arrogance and deceit, had begun to crack under the weight of its own hubris. The celebration had become a reckoning. The reckoning had become a declaration. And Elena Moretti Rossi Vale had only begun. The house that Marcus once called home greeted him with an unfamiliar silence. The hallway, once filled with the soft rhythm of Elena's footsteps and the gentle scent of her jasmine perfume, now echoed with nothing but the hollow sound of his own breathing. He stepped inside as though crossing into the remains of a world that had already died without waiting for him to notice. The living room was stripped bare. The paintings Elena had chosen, which were valued more for their colors than their monetary worth, were no longer there. The shelves stood empty where her books once rested in neat rows, each marked with delicate notes she would scribble in the margins. The piano she used to play in the evenings was no longer by the window. The house felt smaller, tighter, as if it rejected his presence now that the one who brought warmth to it had departed. He walked from room to room, searching for signs that she might return, even a forgotten scarf or an abandoned earring. But Elena left nothing behind, not a single trace. It was as if she had carved herself out of the space with surgical precision, erasing every evidence of her existence in his life. The sight made Marcus feel displaced, like an intruder trespassing in his own home. His phone buzzed with a message from Simon, his longtime assistant. Marcus ignored it at first, unwilling to face anyone. But the silence around him grew so suffocating that he finally opened the message. Simon requested an urgent meeting and insisted that he come to the office immediately. Marcus considered refusing, but a strange instinct told him that this was no ordinary matter. He arrived at the office expecting routine chaos or corporate backlash from the scandal. Instead, he found Simon standing stiffly by the window, face pale, hands clasped tightly together. Papers were scattered across the desk as if someone had been searching for something valuable and discovered something far worse. Simon hesitated before speaking. He informed Marcus that Elena had withdrawn every joint account, canceled every shared subscription, and closed every door connecting them. Marcus felt a stab of humiliation, but the financial losses paled in comparison to the emotional emptiness spreading through him like frost. Then Simon delivered the revelation that would sever the last strand of Marcus's illusion. He explained that Elena Vale was never Elena Vale. Her actual name was Elena Rossi Moretti. She was the daughter of Lorenzo Moretti, a man whose empire dominated nearly half the Italian real estate market and held substantial influence over urban development projects across Europe. Lorenzo was a name that executives whispered with caution, a man whose reach extended quietly but decisively. He was someone even Marcus had heard rumors about, yet never connected to the woman he had married. The shock left Marcus motionless. His first reaction was one of disbelief, the stubborn denial of a man who could not reconcile the image of the gentle woman he had wed with the legacy she secretly carried. He asked Simon if he was certain. Simon affirmed the truth with clipped precision, providing documents that confirmed everything. Marcus stared at the papers, unable to speak. He remembered the early days of their relationship, her reluctance to discuss her family, her refusal to use credit cards with recognizable names, and her habit of minimizing her presence at high society events. He had mistaken her reluctance for shyness. Now he realized it had been a case of self-preservation. Simon continued with a weight in his voice. He disclosed that the office space Marcus rented for his startup was owned by Moretti Holdings. The penthouse Marcus lived in belonged to a Moretti subsidiary. Even the loan Marcus had secured for his expansion had been discreetly guaranteed by them. Elena had woven a silent safety net beneath him, never revealing her hand, never claiming credit, allowing him to believe in his own independence. Marcus felt the ground tilt beneath him. He had built his identity on the belief that he was self-made, strong, untouchable. Now he understood that Elena had sustained his ascent while protecting him from adversaries seeking to undermine him. Her sacrifice had gone unnoticed because he had never cared enough to ask about her inner world. His thoughts raced to the memory of her watching him at the celebration, her eyes calm yet immeasurably distant. She had looked at him like someone who had already broken her heart long before stepping into that room. The truth now clawed at him. She had not left because she was weak. She left because she was strong enough to reclaim what she had lost. Before Marcus could gather himself, the phone on Simon's desk rang. Simon answered briefly, then handed the device to Marcus with a solemn expression. The line connected to a voice Marcus recognized instantly. It belonged to Elena's attorney. The attorney informed him that Elena had filed for divorce. The documents were already processed and would be delivered within hours. The attorney's tone was courteous yet firm. There would be no negotiation, no meeting, no attempt at reconciliation. The decision was final. Marcus felt as though someone had driven a blade through his chest. He lowered the phone slowly and set it down with trembling fingers. Everything that defined him was unraveling with unnerving precision. He wanted to scream, to protest, to undo the last 24 hours, but the truth remained unchanging. He had broken a woman who had only ever wanted honesty and respect. He had mocked her, belittled her, and replaced her with someone else. Now she had removed herself completely from his life and reclaimed the power that had always been hers. He drove home without remembering the route. When he entered the house again, it felt even emptier than before. The walls seemed colder, the air is heavier. He sank onto the sofa, his body collapsing under the weight of the consequences he had created. He replayed every moment with Elena, searching for clues he had ignored. Her quiet smiles, her gentle reminders, her rare moments of vulnerability. He had dismissed them all. He had assumed she would always stay, no matter how deeply he wounded her. But Elena was not a woman who tolerated betrayal. She was a Moretti. She was a Rossi. She was the daughter of a mother who had died because of greed and a father who feared repeating that history. She had learned to survive in silence, and now she had chosen to rise in clarity. Outside, the world carried on as though nothing had changed. Inside, Marcus faced the aftermath of his own arrogance. The woman he had underestimated had vanished from his life, taking her love and her legacy with her. He realized too late that he had not only lost a wife, he had lost the one person who had ever believed in him without needing to be convinced. And because of that loss, his entire world was beginning to collapse. The letters arrived in an unmarked envelope, slipped through the narrow slot of Marcus's rented room as dawn crept over the horizon. He hesitated before opening it, unsure whether it contained another legal document, another reminder of what he had lost, or another blow aimed at the remnants of his pride. His fingers trembled as he untied the twine holding the bundle together. Inside lay a collection of handwritten notes in familiar looping ink, each page dated years earlier. They were copies of the letters Elena had once written but never sent. The first page carried him back to Tuscany, to the sun-drenched hillside roads where he had met a young woman wearing a simple white sundress and holding a map she pretended to understand. He saw her again, standing beside a Vespa that sputtered and coughed before dying completely. The memory placed him beside her, laughing while they pushed the scooter up the uneven path, unaware that destiny had arranged their meeting with more care than either of them could perceive. In those early days, Elena had introduced herself simply as Elena Rossi. No titles, no wealth, no lineage. He remembered how she brushed off questions about her family with gentle deflection and a polite smile. Her warmth had too enchanted him to pry. At the time, he believed her sincerity came from simplicity. Now he understood it came from deliberate distance. The letters chronicled their earliest moments together. One described the afternoon they spent wandering through narrow vineyard paths, tasting grapes warm from the sun and arguing about which variety tasted sweeter. Another recalled evenings in the small apartment he rented near the town square, where she would teach him Italian with sticky notes placed on every object. Lamp became lampada. The door became a porta. Love became amor. She had filled his walls with language and color until the space felt alive. In another memory recalled through her writing, she described the scent of him, a mixture of cedar and determination, and the way he promised he would never let success change who he was. She wrote that she believed him. Back then, he thought of himself as well. He moved through the letters slowly, each one peeling back layers he had forgotten or never appreciated. The text carried the melody of her voice, the gentle rhythm of her thoughts, and the quiet hope she nurtured in the secrecy of her heart. They revealed how deeply she had cared, long before he understood the magnitude of her affection. But even as she wrote of their joy, her words held a soft shadow. She described the lingering fear inherited from watching her mother love a man who exploited her fortune. Her mother had paid the ultimate price for trusting too freely. Elena had carried that warning like a stone in her chest. She wrote of losing her mother to betrayal and how it left her determined to protect her own heart by hiding her true lineage. She needed Marcus to choose her for who she was, not for the empire that followed her. The letters revealed how she struggled between wanting to share the truth and wanting to preserve the innocence of the life they were creating. She wanted a love born from authenticity, not transaction. She tried to escape the shadow of her family's power without abandoning the responsibilities she carried. Marcus had never asked about her past because he assumed the present was all that mattered. He had mistaken her silence for simplicity rather than sacrifice. He reached a letter written during their 3rd year together. In it, Elena described her heartbreak when she heard him casually dismiss her concerns about inequality faced by women in their industry. She felt her voice diminish each time he made a decision that was his alone to make. She worried her heart was becoming invisible in her own marriage. Her pain was expressed gently, not accusatively, but the sadness in her words lingered like a bruise beneath soft fabric. Marcus found himself sinking in the memories he wished to relive with new eyes. The nights she stayed up working quietly beside him. In the mornings, she kissed his forehead before he woke. The moments she softened her strength so his pride could stand taller. Her letters revealed that she noticed every slight, every moment of disregard, every time he treated her contributions as secondary. She had endured the erosion of her dignity with patience he did not deserve. He turned the final letter over and felt a sting when he reached the postscript. It was dated only a month before the night everything fell apart. Elena had written one last message, not to send, but to release her emotions privately. In it, she admitted she still loved him fiercely. She wrote that she wished he could see her fully, not as a wife who existed to support him, but as a partner with her own dreams, burdens, and brilliance. She wished he could understand why she hid her identity and why she feared repeating her mother's tragedy. She ended the letter with a confession that shattered him. She wrote that she no longer knew whether he loved her or merely loved the version of her that fit his world. She wondered if he loved the woman or the comfort she provided. She asked if he had seen her at all. Marcus closed his eyes as the ache inside him deepened. He had never realized how much she had suffered in silence, or how much she had sacrificed to protect the fragile hope they once shared. In a surge of desperate repentance, he gathered paper and pen and spent the entire night writing letters of his own. He described his remorse. He described the moments he cherished. He promised to change, to listen, to learn. He wrote until the room was bathed in pale light at sunrise. He mailed the first stack that afternoon. The letters returned 3 days later, unopened and marked with a red stamp indicating refusal. He sank into the chair of his small room when he saw them. His hand shook as he picked up the untouched envelopes. The rejection carved a deeper wound than any public humiliation could. She had read enough of his excuses throughout their marriage. She had no reason to read more now. Yet what he did not know, what fate kept hidden for now, was this. Elena had opened one letter. Only one. She read the page in silence, her eyes softening at a single sentence, written with sincerity she had rarely seen from him. The words left her breath unsteady, but once finished, she folded the page and let it fall into the fireplace. She had no strength to trust him again, not while her heart still healed from the wounds he had inflicted. Marcus lifted the returned letters to his chest, as if cradling a remnant of a life he destroyed. The past echoed around him in a chorus of what could have been. He had lost her, not to another man, not to wealth, but to his own blindness. The letters from Italy reminded him of the love he once held. They also reminded him of the man he had become. And they warned him that if he ever hoped to earn her forgiveness, he would have to become someone entirely new. The unraveling of Marcus's life did not arrive in a violent storm. It came quietly at first, like a faint ripple across the surface of a calm lake. Then those ripples grew into waves that consumed everything he once believed was indestructible. Days after the letters returned unopened, he received the official notice that his position at Veil Dynamics had been terminated. The board claimed it was due to reputational damage and ethical concerns, but the truth was far more straightforward. His authority had been built on influence, not loyalty, and influence evaporated the moment Elena withdrew her support. Marcus sat in the empty conference room, staring at the locked screen of his company laptop. It no longer recognized his login. The security badges he once wore with pride were deactivated. His office, once bustling with assistants, advisors, and analysts, had been cleared of his personal effects before he even arrived. Not a single colleague reached out to defend him. Not a single friend offered comfort. The corporate world had turned its back with the same cold efficiency he once admired. He walked out of the building, carrying nothing. His reflection in the revolving glass door looked older, diminished, hollowed out by mistakes he could not take back. His phone rang as he stood on the sidewalk. The number belonged to a bank he had worked with for years. He already suspected the reason for the call. When he answered, the representative explained that several of his properties were being repossessed due to unpaid loans and overdue interest. Marcus knew the truth behind the sudden escalation. Lorenzo Moretti had called in every debt tied to the Moretti network. The loans he once believed he had secured through his own brilliance had been quietly guaranteed through Elena's father. Without that unspoken backing, he could no longer sustain the financial weight he had carelessly accumulated. The news struck him harder than he expected. He felt stripped bare, not because of the money, but because he now understood how deeply Elena had protected him, even after he had wounded her. The generosity he never appreciated had been pulled away with clinical precision. Consequences moved swiftly when the shield he had never noticed was suddenly gone. When he arrived at his former penthouse that evening, he found a notice taped to the door, informing him the owner had reclaimed the property. Moretti Holdings had exercised its rights without hesitation. He no longer had the luxury of returning to the space where he once felt untouchable. He had nowhere to go except a small room in a budget motel near the outskirts of the city. The cardboard walls, the stained carpet, the flickering lamp, and the buzzing air conditioner felt like a punishment designed by fate itself. He slept poorly, waking often from dreams in which Elena walked away from him through streets made of smoke and shadows. The following morning, as he tried to find a new direction for his life, Vanessa appeared at the motel entrance. She had not worn makeup, her eyes were swollen, her clothes wrinkled, and her posture unsteady. She looked small, yet determined, as if she had fought an invisible battle before gathering the courage to face him. Marcus hesitated, unsure whether her presence would bring more damage. But Vanessa approached him with a seriousness that silenced his resentment. She told him the truth he had not asked for. She admitted that Apex Innovations had recruited her years ago, offering to pay off her family's crushing debts if she infiltrated Marcus's company. They exploited her desperation, promising safety while treating her as a disposable asset. Vanessa confessed that she had never intended to fall into the chaos that followed, nor did she imagine she would be used to help orchestrate Marcus's downfall. She revealed that Apex had monitored his every move and fed him lies through manipulated data. When she realized the harm being done, she tried to step away, but threats from Victor Kane, the ruthless CEO of Apex, forced her deeper into the scheme. Her voice cracked when she admitted that she felt responsible for the destruction of Elena and Marcus's marriage. She wanted forgiveness, not to absolve herself, but to acknowledge the pain she had helped cause. She said Elena had already confronted her and shown a surprising level of empathy despite the betrayal. Elena had even freed her from further obligations by purchasing Apex in a quiet but decisive takeover soon after the scandal. This revelation stunned Marcus. He had assumed Elena's departure marked the end of her involvement in his life, but she still acted from the shadows, maneuvering with the strategic brilliance he once overlooked. She had secured the evidence of Apex's espionage, dismantled their operation, and removed Vanessa from danger. Her actions were swift and merciful, a sharp contrast to his own impulsive cruelty. Vanessa explained that upon acquiring Apex, Elena had fired her without hesitation, yet left her with enough severance to escape the debts that had haunted her for years. Elena had not destroyed her, she had liberated her. Vanessa broke down in tears as she admitted she did not deserve such grace. Marcus listened in silence. Anger no longer felt appropriate. Pity, confusion, and exhaustion replaced it. He no longer had the energy to hate anyone except himself. Later that night, Marcus attempted to reach Elena at a charity gala hosted by the Moretti family. He waited outside the venue, wearing a suit that no longer fit properly. When he tried to cross the entrance, he was intercepted by Carlo Rossi, one of Lorenzo's closest partners, and a man known for enforcing boundaries with unshakable resolve. Carlo blocked his path with a calm but uncompromising stance. He informed Marcus that he had lost the privilege of approaching Elena without her permission. Marcus protested, insisting he needed to apologize and explain everything. But Carlo remained unmoved. He said that Elena had endured enough and deserved peace. He warned Marcus that any attempt to approach her without invitation would be considered harassment. Before turning away, Carlo revealed something that pierced the last fragment of Marcus's composure. Vanessa had met with Elena privately to beg for forgiveness. She had confessed everything. Elena had listened without judgment, granted her pardon, and told her to rebuild her life with integrity. Elena had shown compassion to the woman who had betrayed her. The realization struck Marcus like a blow. Elena had forgiven the person who helped orchestrate her humiliation, but had not forgiven him, the man she once loved. It was the most unmistakable evidence of how deeply he had wounded her. She could extend empathy to others, but his betrayal had carved a wound that only distance could protect. The empire Marcus built had collapsed. The wealth he flaunted had vanished. The power he admired had dissolved. And the woman who had held him steady through every success had walked away quietly, taking not revenge but dignity with her. As he stood outside the glowing gala hall, watching through the glass as Elena moved among the guests with effortless poise, Marcus realized the brutal truth. He had not lost her because she was weak or because someone stole her away. He had lost her because he never valued the strength she carried until it rose high enough to leave him behind. Marcus woke in the early hours to the gray light spilling through the thin curtains of his small rented room. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and cleaning chemicals. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee, and let the silence press against him. It was a silence that demanded reflection, a silence that forced him to confront every choice he had ever made. His mind wandered back to the notes Elena had left behind during their early days together. They were little scraps of paper with phrases in Italian, reminders of affection, lessons in language, and declarations of love disguised as mundane messages. Marcus had once tossed them aside as trivial clutter, unable to see the depth hidden within the simple words. Now he remembered them with a painful clarity. Phrases like, "I love you more than the moon and stars," echoed in his mind, not as comforting memories, but as accusations of his carelessness. He walked to the small desk by the window and imagined her handwriting there, precise and flowing, each curve intentional, each letter a reflection of her soul. Marcus felt the weight of every time he had ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood her. He had believed he knew love, but these scraps of paper told another story. They told of a woman who had given all she could without asking for recognition, of a patience he had taken for granted, of an understanding he had never reciprocated. The motel room offered little comfort. The thin walls allowed the sounds of distant traffic and occasional arguments from neighbors to intrude. Marcus lay back on the bed and tried to imagine a world in which he had treasured her attention and affection instead of treating it as a background to his own ambitions. His chest tightened, and a lump formed in his throat. He realized he had been blind to the quiet sacrifices that had kept him afloat, the subtle ways she had supported him without fanfare or credit. In a rare moment of clarity, he remembered Lorenzo Moretti's warnings, the unspoken lessons he had always felt as parental constraints rather than wisdom. His father-in-law had seen the potential for arrogance and control in Marcus, and he had attempted to guide Elena toward safety. Marcus had perceived only interference, never protection. And now, with everything stripped away, he finally understood the full measure of what he had lost. The recollections of the letters she wrote surfaced again. He remembered the carefully recorded memories of their early days in Tuscany, the scooter that broke down on the cobbled streets, the laughter under the sun, the wine shared as if it were the elixir of life, the sticky notes she placed to teach him language and culture. Each memory, once trivial, now pulsed with significance. She had revealed herself through actions and words, building a bridge between two worlds, and he had failed to cross it. The thought of her fear and resilience made his chest ache. Elena had endured societal pressures to shrink herself, to make her brilliance less threatening to men like him and others around her. She had learned to navigate a world built to diminish her, all while cultivating a love that he was too self-absorbed to recognize fully. Marcus finally understood that she had not been silent because she lacked a voice. She had chosen not to speak. She had chosen silence because she knew the price of speaking and the value of discerning whom to trust. As he sat on the bed, Marcus tried to write. He picked up a pen and paper and attempted to articulate his remorse. He wrote sentences that crumpled in his hands, fragments of confession that felt inadequate. "I am sorry, it seemed too simple, too weak. I failed to see that you appeared insufficient." He realized that words alone could not bridge the chasm he had created. Actions would be necessary, sustained, and sincere to even hint at redemption. During the afternoon, Vanessa returned. She had promised to help him understand what had transpired behind the scenes, but she also carried an unspoken plea for Marcus to change. She recounted in detail the pressure she had endured from Apex Innovations, the lies she had been forced to tell, and the guilt that had consumed her for playing a role in his humiliation. Yet, she also shared glimpses of Elena's forgiveness, of the grace extended to those who had hurt her, a grace Marcus had not earned. Vanessa's story was a mirror to Marcus's own failures. He saw in her struggle a reflection of what he had never recognized in Elena's daily courage. He saw a woman coerced by circumstance, doing what she thought necessary to survive, just as he had taken Elena's sacrifices for granted. The realization struck him with painful clarity. He had lost her not because she had been weak, not because someone else had been clever, but because he had refused to see the person in front of him as equal, strong, and deserving of care. By evening, Marcus found himself wandering the city streets aimlessly. Neon lights reflected off wet asphalt as rain began to fall. The cool drops stung his face, but he welcomed the discomfort. Each droplet felt like a small penance, a reminder that the world did not pause for regret. He thought about the moments he could not retrieve, the conversations left unsaid, the gestures of love he had ignored. Elena had shown him generosity he did not deserve, patience he had abused, and now distance that forced him to confront his own inadequacy. The night deepened, and Marcus returned to his room with a new determination. He would not attempt to demand forgiveness. He would not craft grand gestures intended to impress or manipulate. He would begin with transformation, with humility, and with acknowledgement of the wrongs he had committed. It was a slow and painful process, but he recognized that redemption could only be built from authenticity, effort, and respect. He opened the letters once more, reading them with care. Each word became a lesson, each phrase a challenge. He let the Italian phrases roll off his tongue, not to memorize them, but to internalize the care and thought embedded in them. He traced the handwriting in his mind, imagining the patience, the discipline, and the love it represented. Marcus finally understood that love required presence, attentiveness, and equality. He had given none of these freely in the past. The night ended with him seated by the window, watching the first stars pierce the dark sky. He whispered a vow to himself, an acknowledgement of the journey he must undertake to become a man worthy of the trust and love Elena had once offered so generously. He accepted the pain, the loss, and the shame as necessary companions in this journey. Marcus realized he could no longer chase what he had lost in arrogance. He could only move forward through understanding, responsibility, and a transformation born of truth. In the quiet of the early morning, Marcus finally allowed himself to grieve, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He let the weight of his mistakes sink in fully, and for the first time, he understood that this descent into humility was the first step toward the possibility of redemption. He closed his eyes and felt a flicker of hope, small but unmistakable, that perhaps one day his actions could honor the sacrifices Elena had made and the love she had so quietly given. Marcus stepped into the modest charity kitchen with hesitancy, the air thick with the scent of simmering tomato sauce, freshly baked bread, and the faint tang of cleaning supplies. The room was alive with the chatter of volunteers, the clatter of utensils, and the gentle laughter of children whose families relied on the food prepared here. It was a world removed from the marble halls and glass towers he once inhabited, yet it felt immediate and real, grounding him in ways he had not anticipated. He was greeted by Sophia, the kitchen manager, a woman whose Latina heritage was evident in her warm smile, expressive gestures, and quiet strength, born from years of navigating adversity. Her story unfolded naturally over the next few minutes as she guided Marcus to his assigned station. She had grown up in a community that had struggled with displacement and marginalization, yet she carried a resilience that transformed hardship into action. Marcus listened intently, the edges of his former arrogance softening as he recognized the courage required to endure and thrive in a world so different from his own. Dr. Elena Reyes, a psychologist volunteering at the center, approached him next. She had spent years working with survivors of systemic inequality and exploitation, particularly women who had been forced to diminish themselves to fit into societal expectations. She spoke to Marcus with an unwavering calm, highlighting how individuals like Elena had been conditioned to shrink their presence, their brilliance, and even their desires to avoid conflict or judgment. She emphasized that acknowledging this imbalance was only the first step. Proper understanding requires action, empathy, and the willingness to confront personal biases and patterns of control. Marcus nodded, absorbing every word. It struck him with force how little he had understood the subtle, persistent pressures that shaped Elena's life, how her measured silence had not been weakness but a shield. He realized that his previous attempts at reconciliation had been superficial, focusing on apologies and self-pity, rather than genuine recognition of the injustices she had endured. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt the urgency to act beyond words. He spent the morning chopping vegetables, stirring large pots of stew, and distributing meals to children and families. The labor was exhausting, yet it grounded him. Every plate he handed out, every smile he received in return, reminded him that impact came from presence, not power. The work was humble, repetitive, and lacking the glamour he once craved, but it carried meaning in a way his wealth had never achieved. During a brief pause, Marcus found himself speaking with a young volunteer named Diego. He was a boy of Mexican descent whose family had fled violence and hardship in their homeland. Diego's courage and resilience were quiet but striking. He spoke about his dreams, his desire to learn, and his gratitude for the meals that allowed him to focus on his studies rather than on survival. Marcus listened, humbled by the clarity with which the boy articulated the world he navigated. It reminded Marcus of Elena's early lessons about empathy, perspective, and the often invisible burdens borne by those society overlooked. The morning continued with unexpected challenges. A sudden influx of families arrived due to a nearby shelter fire, stretching resources thin. Marcus found himself organizing volunteers, coordinating deliveries, and improvising solutions under pressure. He realized that leadership here required humility, flexibility, and responsiveness, not authority or dominance. Each decision carried immediate consequences, and there was no safety net to buffer mistakes. Unlike the controlled environments of corporate boardrooms, here, every action had a tangible impact on real lives. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus reflected on Julian Lee's words from weeks earlier. Julian had shared his journey as a child immigrant facing systemic bias and personal discrimination. He had emphasized that understanding cultural and societal inequalities required more than observation. It demanded engagement, advocacy, and the willingness to challenge the structures that perpetuated injustice. Marcus now understood the depth of Julian's message, realizing that Elena had endured similar invisible battles, and that his past arrogance had blinded him to the inequities that shaped her experiences. As the day progressed, Marcus noticed subtle changes in himself. The act of serving, listening, and responding without expectation of reward or recognition began to shift his perspective. He felt a growing sense of accountability, not just for his past mistakes with Elena, but for how he might contribute positively to a world beyond the walls of his former empire. For the first time, he considered humility not as weakness, but as a conduit for meaningful impact. During a lull, Dr. Reyes approached him again. She encouraged Marcus to reflect on the intersections between his privilege, past behavior, and the broader social realities he had previously ignored. She asked him to consider how Elena's life had been shaped not only by her family legacy, but by the societal expectations placed upon her as a woman navigating power, influence, and autonomy. Marcus realized he had never fully acknowledged the courage it took for her to maintain her composure, assert her boundaries, and act decisively despite the pressures he and others had applied. By evening, the kitchen quieted as families left with their meals and volunteers cleaned the space. Marcus lingered, helping to stack trays and wash utensils, feeling a connection to the work and the people around him. He realized that redemption would not arrive as a single grand gesture. It would be incremental, built through consistency, self-awareness, and service. Each day of engagement, each act of attention and care would contribute to the reconstruction of his character. As he prepared to leave, Marcus looked around the kitchen and the dining area, observing the small victories he had witnessed. A child learning to share, a volunteer gaining confidence, a family nourished and supported. He recognized that these moments, though small and often invisible to the broader world, carried profound significance. They reminded him that impact was measured not in wealth or influence, but in the ways one honored and supported the lives of others. Before departing, Marcus spoke privately with Sophia. He expressed gratitude for her guidance and for the lessons embedded in the community she cultivated. Sophia acknowledged his presence and encouraged him to continue engaging without expectation. The conversation reinforced the idea that redemption required sincerity, patience, and a willingness to confront one's limitations without deflection. Outside, Marcus paused under the streetlights, feeling the cool night air against his face. The city around him continued in motion, indifferent to his personal journey, yet the experiences within the charity kitchen had shifted something fundamental within him. He carried the memory of Elena's sacrifices, Vanessa's confessions, Diego's resilience, and the quiet strength of the volunteers as tangible markers of the world he now wished to navigate differently. He knew the path ahead would be challenging. Rebuilding trust, repairing relationships, and redefining his own identity required more than words, apologies, or temporary gestures. It demanded sustained action, humility, and a profound respect for those he had wronged, as well as for the broader struggles of individuals, often rendered invisible by wealth and power. Marcus walked home slowly, each step heavy with reflection and cautious hope. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of purpose unlinked to status or dominance. He understood that true transformation would not be immediate or dramatic. It would be measured in small acts, repeated consistently over time, and guided by empathy, accountability, and a willingness to learn from those who had lived with courage and integrity far longer than he had. As the city lights blurred into the night, Marcus resolved silently to continue this work, to honor Elena's lessons, and to commit to becoming a man whose actions reflected understanding and respect. He realized that redemption was not a destination, but a journey, one that began here, in the quiet hum of a charity kitchen, with the first deliberate steps toward repair and growth. Marcus arrived at Lorenzo Moretti's towering office with a mixture of apprehension and determination. The building, a modernist marvel of glass and steel, reflected both the power and precision that defined the Moretti empire. Marcus had entered similar offices many times before, yet this encounter felt fundamentally different. This was not a negotiation, a merger, or a transaction. This was accountability, a reckoning with a man whose daughter had endured pain, in part due to Marcus's own arrogance. Lorenzo's office overlooked the city skyline, the golden light of late afternoon casting sharp lines across the polished surfaces. Marcus stepped forward cautiously, taking note of the meticulous order of the space. Lorenzo sat behind a grand desk, his posture composed, his gaze steady. He had aged gracefully, the lines on his face speaking to decades of experience, discipline, and unyielding control. Marcus felt the weight of his own inadequacies pressing against the sleek walls. Lorenzo did not rise to greet him. Instead, he gestured for Marcus to sit, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The silence stretched, not as a means of intimidation, but as a space for contemplation. Marcus felt vulnerable, exposed in a way he had rarely experienced. He began by attempting to apologize, his words stumbling at first as he grappled with the enormity of the wrongs he had committed against Elena. Lorenzo listened without interruption. His expression remained unreadable, though his eyes held the faintest glimmer of understanding. He asked Marcus to recount his actions and reflect on their consequences. Marcus stuttered at first, then with increasing clarity. He acknowledged the public humiliation he had caused Elena, the betrayal of trust, and the arrogance that had closed his eyes to her needs and perspectives. He admitted that he had underestimated the pressures and constraints she faced as a woman, navigating a world designed to diminish her voice. Lorenzo's questions were sharp but measured. He pressed Marcus on specific moments in their marriage, asking why he had dismissed Elena's concerns and why he had failed to recognize her sacrifices. Marcus answered honestly, stripping away excuses and rationalizations. He confessed to being self-centered, valuing control and image over understanding and empathy. With each admission, he felt a slight weight lift, though the pain of his failures remained. At one point, Lorenzo spoke of the piano, the instrument Elena had cherished and which Marcus had often ignored. The piano represented more than music. It symbolized memory, devotion, and the lineage of care passed from mother to daughter. Lorenzo reminded Marcus that in dismissing or neglecting such symbols, he had further demonstrated a lack of attentiveness and respect. Marcus felt a deep pang of regret, recognizing that the piano had been a test of presence, and he had failed to meet it. Lorenzo then revealed details of his initial intentions for Elena, including the arranged engagement with Theodore Langford. The arrangement had been designed to protect her from unnecessary suffering and to secure her future within the family empire. Marcus felt the tension of this revelation, understanding the difficult decisions Lorenzo had made not to constrain but to shield. He realized the complexity of family obligations and societal pressures that had shaped Elena's life long before he had entered it. Through the conversation, Marcus began to perceive Lorenzo not only as a patriarch, but as a man who had learned the hard lessons of protection, power, and patience. Lorenzo acknowledged that his own methods had been flawed, that overprotection could stifle growth, yet he had acted from a place of care. Marcus recognized the parallel to his own failures. Attempts to assert authority had masked insecurity, misunderstanding, and fear of inadequacy. The dialogue shifted subtly as Lorenzo described Elena's strength and resilience. He emphasized that she had chosen her path, navigated challenges, and acted with a clarity and purpose that Marcus had failed to honor. Marcus listened, humbled, absorbing the depth of responsibility and independence Elena had cultivated. He recognized that true partnership required not control but respect, not dominance but collaboration. As the conversation progressed, Lorenzo shared moments from Elena's upbringing that shaped her fortitude. He recounted her mother's sacrifices, the early lessons in discretion, resilience, and self-reliance, and the ways Elena had internalized these principles to navigate a patriarchal world. Marcus felt a growing awareness of the magnitude of the upbringing he had dismissed and the pressures Elena had shouldered silently. Towards the end of the meeting, Lorenzo shifted from critique to counsel. He did not offer forgiveness on Elena's behalf, nor did he demand restitution. Instead, he provided guidance, emphasizing that Marcus's path forward depended on genuine transformation, humility, and consistent acknowledgement of the inequalities and sacrifices that had defined Elena's life. Marcus understood that this counsel was a rare opportunity, a chance to learn, to rebuild, and to prepare for the possibility of reconnection, though it would not be granted lightly. As the discussion concluded, Lorenzo extended a subtle yet powerful gesture. He did not shake Marcus's hand, nor did he offer reassurance. He merely nodded, signaling that the meeting had ended. Marcus left the office with a mixture of relief and lingering tension. The encounter had been rigorous, exposing, and instructive. It had forced him to confront not only his mistakes, but the structural and interpersonal complexities that had shaped Elena's world. Outside, the city glimmered as evening approached. Marcus strolled, reflecting on the lessons imparted. He understood that reconciliation with Elena would not occur without profound, sustained change. He recognized that respect, empathy, and acknowledgement of her agency were prerequisites for any meaningful connection. He realized that the process would require patience, courage, and the willingness to be vulnerable in ways he had never experienced before. In the quiet of the walk back, Marcus contemplated the piano once more, imagining Elena playing, the music resonating with memory, emotion, and resilience. He felt a renewed commitment to honor her experiences, to recognize the weight of her journey, and to ensure that his future actions reflected understanding and equality rather than dominance and self-interest. The meeting with Lorenzo had left Marcus raw, unsettled, and yet strangely invigorated. For the first time in weeks, he felt a measure of direction. He recognized the necessity of humility and the transformative power of confronting truth without deflection. He acknowledged that Elena's choices, guided by strength and principle, had set a standard he had yet to meet. As night fell, Marcus resolved to integrate the lessons from this encounter into every decision, every interaction, and every effort to rebuild himself. He understood that the path to redemption would be measured not by grand gestures, but by consistent, thoughtful, and equitable actions. He carried the weight of the conversation with Lorenzo like a compass, guiding him toward awareness, accountability, and the possibility of reparation. The encounter had been more than a confrontation. It was an initiation into the realities of respect, partnership, and the necessity of understanding a life lived with challenges he could scarcely imagine. Marcus knew the work ahead would be difficult. Still, the clarity provided by Lorenzo's insight offered the first genuine foundation for transformation, growth, and the eventual hope of earning trust once again. The fire started quietly, a faint smoke curling from the back of Haven House, the shelter where Elena had spent years dedicating herself to the care of the displaced and vulnerable. Marcus arrived at the scene, unaware of the magnitude of the danger, the distant wail of sirens growing louder as he rounded the corner. Flames licked the walls of the building, their orange glow reflecting on the wet pavement, and the air was thick with acrid smoke that stunned the eyes and made every breath a struggle. Volunteers and staff shouted instructions to one another as panic rippled through the small crowd gathered outside. Parents clutched children, while others tried desperately to form human chains, moving belongings and essential supplies to safety. Amid the chaos, Marcus saw the figures of the children huddled together, fear etched into their faces. The world he had once inhabited, full of boardrooms and financial statements, could not have prepared him for this immediacy of human fragility. Sophia, the manager who had guided him through the charity kitchen, ran past, barking orders and ensuring everyone had an exit route. She spotted Marcus and called his name, her voice carrying both urgency and authority. Without hesitation, Marcus pushed through the smoke, navigating obstacles with a singular focus. He ignored the heat against his skin and the stinging of his lungs, his attention locked on a small figure trapped near the back. Diego, the boy he had met weeks earlier, was crouched beneath a collapsed shelf, terrified and coughing from smoke. Marcus reached him and lifted him to his feet, brushing away soot and debris. Diego clung to him, trembling, and Marcus wrapped his arms around the boy, moving with care as they made their way to the exit. The outside air felt like a reprieve, though the scene of chaos still raged around them. He handed Diego to Sophia, feeling a rush of relief and guilt in equal measure. He had acted instinctively, but he knew instinct alone would not undo the cumulative mistakes that had brought him to this point in life. Through the growing crowd, Marcus spotted Elena. She had arrived, unannounced, moving with precision and calm amidst the panic. Her typically composed eyes were wide with concern as she coordinated volunteers, instructed firefighters, and ensured that no one was left behind. Marcus watched her, a sense of awe mingling with regret. She had never relied on him, never expected him to intervene in her world, and yet here he was, learning the first lessons of true courage by following her lead. The fire intensified, and Marcus made a decision. He saw another figure, an elderly volunteer trapped near the kitchen, smoke curling around his head. Without thought for himself, Marcus ran back into the burning building. Heat scorched his skin, and debris threatened to collapse around him. Still, he pressed on, driven by the memory of every lesson Elena and those he had met had taught him about responsibility, presence, and selfless action. He lifted the man to safety, staggering outside, gasping for air. The applause from the gathered crowd was incidental, unimportant. What mattered was the act itself, the choice to risk comfort and safety for another life. As he moved through the chaos, Vanessa appeared. Her expression was one of contrition and determination. She had heard of the fire and arrived to assist. She called out to Marcus, and together they coordinated the evacuation of several families still inside. Vanessa's earlier confessions, her acknowledgments of mistakes, and her commitment to act with integrity now manifested in courageous, deliberate action. Marcus saw in her a second chance at redemption, not for himself, but for someone who had been coerced and misled in the past. Victor Kane, the CEO of Apex Innovations, arrived unexpectedly at the scene. His presence was menacing, a reminder of the corporate schemes that had disrupted Marcus and Elena's lives. He had orchestrated the fire as retaliation against Elena, believing that destruction would weaken her influence and send a message of fear. Marcus realized that this was no longer about financial loss or personal humiliation. This was about real harm, the type that could end lives if left unchecked. The situation escalated quickly. Marcus confronted Kane outside the building, shielding volunteers and families with his body and shouting for him to leave. Kane attempted to assert control, but Marcus's determination and the moral weight of the volunteers around him rendered Kane powerless. Security arrived shortly thereafter, but Marcus had already made up his mind. He would not allow fear or manipulation to dictate the fate of those who had no other protector. Inside the chaos, Marcus noticed Elena struggling with a large, frightened child. Her composure wavered for the first time as flames crept along the ceiling. Marcus rushed to assist, lifting debris that trapped a makeshift cot and carrying the child to safety. Their eyes met briefly, and in that glance, Marcus saw recognition, gratitude, and an acknowledgement of the change in him. He had acted not for self-aggrandizement, but out of a genuine commitment to protect, to serve, and to act in accordance with principles he had long ignored. By the time the fire was brought under control, the building was severely damaged, yet every person inside had survived. Marcus stood outside, covered in soot and ash, exhausted beyond comprehension. He realized that the fire, terrifying and destructive, had also become a crucible of transformation. He had been tested not by wealth, influence, or pride, but by immediate human need, and he had responded with courage, humility, and selflessness. Elena approached him quietly, her hair damp, face streaked with soot, but her eyes steady. She did not speak immediately, letting the gravity of the moment settle around them. When she finally did, her voice was calm but intense. She acknowledged his actions, recognizing that he had stepped into danger without hesitation. And yet she reminded him that proper redemption required more than isolated acts of bravery. It required consistency, insight, and an ongoing commitment to understanding and respecting the lives of others. Marcus absorbed her words with humility. He realized that this moment, though significant, was only a single step in a longer journey. The fire had tested his courage, but it had also highlighted the depth of Elena's strength and the stakes of the lives she touched daily. He understood that actions inspired by empathy, guided by awareness, and executed with integrity carried far greater weight than words or public gestures ever could. Vanessa joined them, her presence now less of a threat and more of a partnership in recovery. She confessed that she had known of Kane's involvement, but had been too afraid to act earlier. Together, they debriefed with volunteers, coordinated cleanup efforts, and ensured that families had shelter and sustenance. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a commitment. The fire had illuminated the difference between performative action and genuine accountability, and he now understood the latter in a way he had never understood before. As the night descended, Marcus remained on the scene, observing the community's resilience, the dedication of the volunteers, and the quiet authority of Elena as she directed efforts without fanfare. He felt a profound respect and a renewed commitment to the principles she embodied: courage, empathy, and unwavering dedication to justice and care. The fire, though devastating, had become a catalyst for insight, accountability, and the beginnings of a transformation that might one day allow him to reconnect with the woman who had taught him the true meaning of strength. By the time he finally left, Marcus was covered in soot, exhausted but alive in a way he had not felt for years. The fire had burned away his illusions, leaving only clarity, resolve, and the understanding that redemption was not a gift, but a continuous practice rooted in courage, service, and integrity. Marcus followed the narrow path through the cemetery, the autumn leaves crunching softly beneath his feet. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gravestones, and the air carried the faint scent of damp earth and fallen foliage. He approached the grave with reverence, his chest heavy with anticipation and unease. Elena had requested this meeting, not in the grandiose settings of their former life, but here, where history, memory, and reflection intertwined. Elena stood beside the tombstone, her posture composed yet tinged with vulnerability. Her hand rested lightly on the engraved marble, a gesture of connection and remembrance. Marcus could see the quiet strength she exuded, the same strength that had guided her through betrayal, corporate scheming, and personal trials. She turned to him slowly, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of resolve, sadness, and expectation. The tombstone belonged to her mother, a woman who had lived with both elegance and caution, whose life had been marked by strategic decisions that protected her family yet exposed the vulnerabilities of love and trust. Elena spoke first, her voice steady but infused with emotion. She described the lessons her mother had imparted, the importance of discernment, and the cost of misplaced trust. She reflected on the ways her mother had navigated power, vulnerability, and self-respect, and how those lessons had shaped her own life. Marcus listened attentively, his heart heavy with the recognition of his past failures. He understood that he had repeatedly misjudged Elena's actions, her intentions, and the strength she carried silently. He realized that the choices he had made had placed her in positions of unnecessary risk, both emotionally and practically. The gravity of the moment pressed upon him, forcing him to confront the depth of the damage caused by arrogance and selfishness. Elena continued, recounting the engagement to Theodore Langford, arranged by her father as a measure of protection. She explained the rationale behind it, the balance of duty and desire, and the careful considerations that had led to the decision. Marcus felt a pang of recognition. The engagement was never meant to confine or control Elena. It had been a strategy to shield her from further harm and ensure stability in a world where trust was a scarce commodity. With deliberate calm, Elena revealed her decision to cancel the engagement. She had reflected deeply on the difference between safety and love, between obligation and choice. She would not let security dictate her heart, nor would she let fear define her relationships. The choice was entirely hers, an assertion of autonomy and the culmination of years of observation, learning, and resilience. Marcus felt a mixture of relief, awe, and a subtle fear. The power of her choice was both liberating and humbling. Marcus spoke cautiously, aware that words could either bridge the growing distance or deepen it irreparably. He expressed his recognition of Elena's agency, acknowledging that her decisions were her own and that he had no right to influence them in an undue manner. He admitted his previous failures, his arrogance, and his inability to understand the pressures she had navigated silently. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not demand reconciliation. Instead, he offered a sincere acknowledgement of her strength and a commitment to change himself, independent of any expectation. Elena listened, her gaze unwavering. She responded with clarity, emphasizing the importance of accountability, reflection, and sustained integrity. She reminded Marcus that actual change was measured not by declarations or promises, but by consistent, thoughtful action. She spoke of the need to honor those who had been wronged and to confront personal shortcomings with courage, honesty, and humility. Marcus absorbed every word, realizing that this counsel was as valuable as any financial, strategic, or emotional lesson he had ever encountered. They walked together along the cemetery paths, speaking of principles, experiences, and the invisible burdens carried by those who had endured injustice, betrayal, or societal inequities. Marcus found himself reflecting on his own life, recognizing patterns of control, entitlement, and blindness that had harmed others. He understood that his journey of redemption required engagement not only with Elena, but with the broader implications of his behavior, influence, and decisions. Elena shared stories of her mother's resilience, the quiet courage required to navigate patriarchal structures, and the careful cultivation of agency in a world eager to constrain her. Marcus realized the parallels between her lessons and the challenges Elena had faced herself. The recognition of these connections deepened his respect, his humility, and his commitment to meaningful change. At one point, Elena paused beside a modest tree, its branches stretching toward the sky, leaves trembling in the autumn breeze. She reflected on the power of choice, the significance of boundaries, and the necessity of self-respect. Marcus listened in silence, recognizing that her life had been a continuous exercise in discernment, courage, and principled action. The encounter underscored the contrast between his impulsive decisions driven by pride and the deliberate, thoughtful choices Elena had made throughout her life. The conversation turned to the broader concept of love, autonomy, and partnership. Elena emphasized that love was not safety, possession, or convenience. True love required recognition of the other's agency, respect for their choices, and a willingness to embrace equality in decision-making. Marcus felt a profound understanding emerging. He had never truly grasped the depth of these principles, but now they resonated clearly, illuminated by Elena's experience and the lessons embedded in her life. As the afternoon waned, they approached the tombstone once more. Elena laid a hand upon the marble and expressed her gratitude for the opportunity to honor her mother's memory, acknowledge past struggles, and assert her own path forward. Marcus stood respectfully, recognizing that this moment symbolized both closure and a beginning. It was a reminder of responsibility, the importance of reflection, and the need for consistent, principled action in all relationships. Elena's decision to cancel the engagement was not a rejection, but a declaration of autonomy. It reflected her commitment to living authentically, honoring her values, and refusing to be constrained by fear or expectation. Marcus understood that this choice, while difficult for him to witness, was essential to the integrity, strength, and growth of the woman he had once taken for granted. As they parted, Marcus felt a mixture of reverence, humility, and determination. He understood that the path forward required more than apologies or gestures. It demanded sustained reflection, engagement with reality, and actions aligned with integrity and respect. Elena had demonstrated that autonomy and strength were inseparable, and he recognized the need to honor those principles in his ongoing journey. The cemetery, silent and solemn, became a space of reckoning, clarity, and transformation. Marcus left with a renewed sense of purpose, carrying the weight of accountability and the responsibility to act with integrity. He understood that redemption was not a destination, but a continuous practice of thoughtfulness, empathy, and principled action. He walked away slowly, leaves crunching beneath his feet, the decision to cancel the engagement echoing in his mind as a testament to Elena's strength, courage, and unwavering commitment to self-determination. Marcus resolved to continue his path of transformation, fully aware that the journey would be long, demanding, and measured not by outcomes, but by the consistency of his choices, actions, and respect for the autonomy of those he had wronged. 6 months had passed since the fire at Haven House, and Marcus had begun to rebuild his life, focusing on integrity, empathy, and sustained action. He had launched a nonprofit initiative centered on secure digital platforms for shelters and charities, combining his technical expertise with a newfound commitment to serve communities in need. The organization was modest in scale but ambitious in purpose, offering free services to support safety, communication, and resource coordination for vulnerable populations. The morning sunlight poured into a small office, illuminating the neat rows of monitors, stacks of documents, and whiteboards filled with diagrams and plans. Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing reports from the previous week to ensure that the nonprofit systems functioned seamlessly. Each success, no matter how minor, carried a deeper meaning than any financial gain he had pursued in the past. It was work that mattered, work that connected him to lives beyond his own. He had agreed to attend a conference on social innovation, where he would present his work and engage with other leaders in philanthropy and technology. Elena had also been invited to speak, representing Haven House and sharing her insights into sustainable support for displaced and underserved communities. The prospect of seeing her after months of absence brought a mix of anticipation, anxiety, and hope. Marcus understood that this encounter could not be approached with expectations of forgiveness or reconciliation. Instead, he focused on presence, authenticity, and demonstrating the growth he had achieved through sustained effort. The conference hall buzzed with activity as Marcus entered, taking note of the diverse range of participants. He spotted Julian Lee immediately, engaged in conversation with other attendees. Julian's journey as a child immigrant and entrepreneur had always resonated with Marcus, and now it served as a model for persistence, cultural awareness, and ethical responsibility. Julian greeted Marcus warmly, and they exchanged updates on their respective initiatives, touching on challenges, victories, and lessons learned. Julian emphasized the importance of community engagement and inclusivity, lessons Marcus had absorbed and applied in his own work. The keynote session began, and Elena took the stage. Marcus watched from the back of the room, observing her composure, eloquence, and commanding presence. She spoke of the fire, the resilience of Haven House, and the strategies implemented to ensure safety, education, and dignity for all residents. Her words were measured, inspiring, and reflective of both experience and vision. Marcus felt a profound respect for her unwavering dedication and recognized the courage required to lead with such clarity and empathy. After her presentation, the conference shifted to smaller discussion groups and networking sessions. Marcus approached Elena cautiously, ensuring that his demeanor conveyed respect, acknowledgement, and humility. He spoke first, congratulating her on the presentation and sharing observations about the impact of her work. Elena responded with professionalism and warmth, engaging in dialogue about initiatives, technology integration, and strategies to enhance community support. Their conversation was measured, focused on shared goals rather than personal history, yet Marcus sensed a subtle acknowledgement of the growth and change he had achieved. During the session, Vanessa appeared, her presence less threatening and more collaborative. She had worked with Marcus in the past months to support the nonprofit, offering technical assistance, advocacy, and coordination. Vanessa spoke openly about her own journey, acknowledging past mistakes and sharing the lessons she had learned about integrity, accountability, and resilience. Her willingness to contribute constructively reinforced Marcus's understanding that redemption required consistent action, humility, and commitment beyond words. As the day progressed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the interplay between past mistakes and present responsibility. He recognized that reconciliation, whether with Elena, Vanessa, or the broader community, depended on demonstrating consistent ethical behavior, empathy, and respect for others' autonomy. The work itself had become a vehicle for transformation, offering tangible evidence of change through service, problem-solving, and community impact. Elena invited Marcus to join her at a roundtable discussion on inclusive support systems for marginalized populations. The conversation was dynamic, touching on policy, technology, and cultural considerations. Marcus contributed insightfully, sharing experiences from the nonprofit while deferring to Elena's expertise and leadership. He noted the careful way she guided dialogue, valuing input while maintaining focus on outcomes. Her approach contrasted sharply with his past tendencies toward control and dominance, underscoring the lessons he had absorbed about equitable collaboration. Julian Lee also participated in the discussion, sharing stories of overcoming bias and systemic obstacles. He highlighted the importance of culturally informed solutions and ethical leadership. Marcus listened intently, integrating these perspectives with his own reflections and experiences. He understood that meaningful engagement required both humility and initiative, recognizing structural inequalities while applying practical solutions grounded in respect, inclusivity, and accountability. After the roundtable, Marcus, Elena, and Julian stepped outside for a brief break. The city skyline stretched before them, sunlight reflecting off glass towers and streets bustling with energy. Marcus observed Elena's calm composure and attentive demeanor, feeling a renewed sense of admiration and recognition of the strength, resilience, and leadership she embodied. He spoke cautiously, sharing insights from the nonprofit, reflecting on the lessons learned from past failures and emphasizing his commitment to sustained ethical action. Elena responded with measured warmth, acknowledging the progress she had observed while reminding him that growth was an ongoing process. Their dialogue emphasized principles of equality, respect, and intentionality, reinforcing that any future engagement between them would require alignment with shared values rather than nostalgia or sentiment. Marcus absorbed these points, recognizing that patience, humility, and consistent demonstration of character were paramount. As the conference concluded, Marcus observed the participants departing, exchanging business cards, stories, and commitments to action. He felt a sense of cautious optimism, recognizing that the efforts he had undertaken in the past months had begun to align with the principles he now sought to embody. The encounters with Elena, Julian, and Vanessa highlighted the importance of integrity, community focus, and empathetic leadership, reinforcing the necessity of sustained engagement over superficial gestures. Later that evening, Marcus reflected on the day's events, the progress made, and the challenges that remained. He understood that rebuilding trust, whether personal or professional, required ongoing diligence, authenticity, and accountability. The conference had provided not only exposure to diverse perspectives, but also a framework for understanding how ethical action, empathy, and service could facilitate meaningful impact and foster reconciliation over time. As he prepared to leave the venue, Marcus felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The day had been a testament to the power of deliberate, sustained effort and to the potential for growth when guided by principles of respect, equality, and community engagement. He recognized that the journey was far from complete. Still, he carried a renewed sense of purpose, clarity, and commitment to ethical action, understanding that meaningful change required consistency, patience, and the courage to act in alignment with one's values. Marcus walked through the city streets that evening, reflecting on the lessons learned, the conversations held, and the subtle progress achieved. He felt the weight of accountability, balanced by the possibility of redemption, understanding that the path forward required continued reflection, empathy, and principled engagement. The gradual reunion with Elena, the collaborative work with Julian and Vanessa, and the tangible impact of his nonprofit all reinforced the notion that meaningful change was both possible and necessary, achieved through sustained effort, ethical action, and a commitment to equality and respect. He resolved silently to maintain this course, to honor the lessons of the past, and to continue building a life defined not by wealth or status, but by service, integrity, and authentic connection with others. The process of rebuilding had begun, and Marcus now understood that its success would be measured not in accolades or recognition, but in the tangible, lasting improvements his actions created in the lives of those he had once failed and those he now sought to support. Marcus and Elena arrived in Tuscany under a pale morning sky, the rolling hills and vineyards bathed in soft, golden light. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of olive trees and freshly tilled earth. This place held the weight of memory and history, the backdrop of their earliest encounters and the beginning of their entwined journey. Returning here was not merely a visit, it was a confrontation with the past, with choices made, mistakes endured, and lessons learned. Elena led the way to a villa overlooking the valley, a property she had chosen for its privacy and significance. Marcus followed, aware of the tension between anticipation and apprehension. He had grown over the past months, yet he knew that confronting the past required more than personal growth. It demanded acknowledgement, accountability, and the courage to face consequences openly. Vanessa arrived shortly afterward, her presence both a reminder of past missteps and a symbol of redemption. She had committed herself to supporting Marcus in bringing Apex Innovations to justice, acknowledging the manipulation and coercion that had influenced her prior actions. Her sincerity and dedication were evident, a testament to the transformative power and the possibility of making amends through meaningful engagement. The villa's courtyard was bathed in sunlight, and the three of them walked together, reflecting on the intertwined events that had led to this moment. Marcus spoke first, recounting the growth he had experienced over the past few months, the lessons he had learned from serving, practicing humility, and engaging with marginalized communities. He acknowledged his past arrogance, the harm he had caused, and the steps he had taken to rebuild trust and act with integrity. Elena listened attentively, her expression calm yet discerning. She asked pointed questions about his motives, the consistency of his actions, and his understanding of the consequences of his past behavior. Marcus responded with honesty, avoiding justification or rationalization. He described specific initiatives, the challenges faced, and the tangible impact of his efforts on communities, volunteers, and the lives of those directly affected by his past negligence. The conversation shifted to Vanessa, who shared her own reflections on the journey from coercion to accountability. She described the internal struggle of reconciling past mistakes with the desire to contribute positively, as well as the lessons learned about integrity, courage, and advocacy. Marcus listened, recognizing the parallels between her experiences and his own, understanding that redemption required active engagement and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. As the day progressed, they visited key sites that had marked turning points in their shared history. Marcus reflected on the early days in Tuscany, the Vespa rides, the laughter, and the genuine moments of connection with Elena that had been overshadowed by ambition and misunderstanding. He acknowledged the pain caused by his inability to fully appreciate her perspective, her agency, and the cultural and personal challenges she had faced. Elena shared insights from her own journey, the resilience cultivated through navigating societal expectations, familial obligations, and the pressures of leadership. She emphasized the importance of autonomy, ethical decision-making, and the ability to discern genuine intentions from self-interest. Marcus felt a deepening respect and understanding, recognizing that Elena's strength was neither contingent on his approval nor diminished by past missteps. Vanessa revealed critical information regarding Victor Kane and Apex Innovations, detailing the strategies used to manipulate both Marcus and Elena, as well as the ethical compromises she had been forced to consider. Marcus and Elena collaborated on this, developing a strategy to hold Kane accountable while preserving the integrity of their respective missions. This collaboration was a turning point, demonstrating that past conflicts could be addressed constructively when guided by principles of justice, transparency, and shared purpose. The afternoon brought a legal session where Kane's actions were formally challenged. Vanessa testified with clarity and conviction, recounting the coercion, ethical breaches, and the chain of events orchestrated by Kane to undermine Elena and Marcus. The proceedings were tense, but the evidence, combined with Vanessa's credible account, shed light on the truth. Marcus observed Elena's composure, noting the poise and authority she maintained as she faced a man whose schemes had caused extensive harm. Through the process, Marcus recognized that justice was not merely punitive but restorative. The opportunity to confront Kane, to hold him accountable, and to prevent further harm reflected the transformation they had undergone. Marcus's role was no longer about personal vindication, but about contributing to fairness, integrity, and the protection of others. He felt a sense of responsibility that transcended ego, guided by ethical commitment and empathy. After the proceedings, Marcus and Elena walked through the vineyard, the warm sunlight filtering through leaves and casting dappled shadows across the path. They spoke quietly about autonomy, partnership, and the meaning of equality in relationships. Elena emphasized that mutual respect and recognition of each other's agency were the foundation of any enduring connection. Marcus understood this profoundly, having experienced the consequences of imbalance and the value of deliberate, principled action. Vanessa, walking alongside them, shared reflections on accountability and redemption. She expressed gratitude for the opportunity to act with integrity, to support justice, and to contribute to a resolution that reflected ethical principles. Marcus recognized in her journey a mirror of his own, understanding that redemption was not a solitary pursuit, but often intertwined with the acknowledgement, repair, and support of others who had been affected by his past choices. As the sun began to set over the Tuscan hills, Marcus felt a deep sense of closure and potential. The confrontation with Kane had addressed tangible injustices, while the personal reflections and exchanges with Elena and Vanessa had illuminated the pathways toward trust, respect, and equitable partnership. He realized that facing the past required courage, honesty, and sustained commitment, and that the outcomes were as much about personal integrity as they were about external resolution. Elena paused at the edge of a vineyard, her gaze sweeping across the landscape. She spoke of the importance of lessons learned from hardship, the value of resilience, and the need to act with foresight and compassion. Marcus listened, absorbing the wisdom she conveyed, understanding that these principles were not merely abstract, but actionable in every decision, interaction, and relationship. The evening concluded with a quiet reflection in the villa, the golden light fading into twilight. Marcus, Elena, and Vanessa shared a moment of understanding, a recognition of growth, accountability, and the work yet to come. Marcus felt the weight of the past balanced by the clarity of purpose, knowing that the journey forward would require continued vigilance, ethical decision-making, and genuine respect for the autonomy and experiences of others. As night settled over Tuscany, Marcus contemplated the transformation he had undergone. He understood that reconciliation, whether personal or professional, required more than mere intention. It demanded consistent, principled action, humility, and an acknowledgement of the complexities inherent in human relationships. The final challenge, facing the past in its entirety, had solidified his understanding of accountability, empathy, and the importance of aligning actions with core values. He walked through the villa gardens, the cool night air carrying the scent of jasmine and earth. The journey had been arduous, filled with reflection, confrontation, and moral reckoning. Yet it had also revealed the possibilities of redemption, growth, and authentic connection. Marcus recognized that the final challenge was not a single moment, but an ongoing commitment to live with integrity, serve with empathy, and honor the autonomy and dignity of those he had once wronged. In the quiet of Tuscany, under a sky streaked with stars, Marcus felt a sense of possibility. The past had been confronted, mistakes acknowledged, and accountability demonstrated. The path ahead required vigilance, humility, and continued engagement. But the foundations for redemption, trust, and partnership had been firmly established. The lessons of courage, integrity, and empathy would guide every step forward, illuminating a journey defined not by past failures, but by sustained, principled action and the promise of a future shaped by respect, understanding, and equality. The morning of the wedding arrived with a gentle warmth, sunlight streaming through the windows of the small chapel nestled at the edge of a vineyard. The simplicity of the setting contrasted sharply with the grandeur Marcus and Elena had once known. Yet, there was a profound beauty in its modesty, a reflection of authenticity and the values they now shared. Guests arrived quietly, numbering fewer than 30, including Julian, Sophia, and Vanessa, who now stood as witnesses to transformation, accountability, and reconciliation. Marcus waited at the front of the chapel, nerves mingling with anticipation. He felt a calm groundedness that had been absent in the days of power struggles, social pretense, and ego-driven decisions. The journey that had brought him to this moment was marked by reflection, humility, and active engagement with the consequences of his past choices. He understood that this day was not a culmination of wealth, status, or appearances, but a testament to growth, equality, and the conscious cultivation of partnership. Elena appeared at the entrance, radiant in her simplicity, her presence commanding attention not through opulence, but through poise, confidence, and the quiet assertion of self. She walked with measured steps, her eyes meeting Marcus's with a mixture of warmth, certainty, and a recognition of the journey they had undertaken, both separately and together. Every past struggle, every lesson learned, and every act of integrity had led to this moment, where equality and mutual respect formed the foundation of their union. The ceremony began with soft music, a piano rendition of a piece Elena loved, filling the chapel with gentle resonance. The minister spoke of love defined by partnership, respect, and equality rather than possession or hierarchy. Marcus listened intently, understanding that this was more than a ritual. It was a formal acknowledgement of values he had learned through confrontation, reflection, and consistent ethical action. Every word reinforced the principles that had guided their paths toward this day. Vows were exchanged in a quiet yet powerful cadence. Marcus spoke first, acknowledging Elena not as someone to protect or control, but as an equal, a partner whose agency, strength, and vision he fully respected. He promised to see her clearly, honor her choices, and nurture a relationship built on mutual support and understanding. His words carried the weight of experience, humility, and deliberate growth, reflecting the lessons of past mistakes and the ongoing commitment required to sustain equitable love. Elena responded with vows that emphasized autonomy, collaboration, and equality. She stresses the importance of shared decision-making, respect for individuality, and acknowledging each other's contributions to the relationship. Her words were clear and unwavering, a testament to the strength she had cultivated through challenges, reflection, and principled action. The exchange of vows crystallized the transformation both had undergone, demonstrating that true love was grounded in mutual respect, trust, and the courage to act ethically in all circumstances. The ceremony continued with symbolic acts of unity. They lit a single candle together, representing the merging of their paths while maintaining the integrity of their individual journeys. They shared a brief exchange of written notes, a nod to their history of communication through letters, demonstrating that emotional honesty, reflection, and understanding were essential components of a thriving partnership. The gestures were subtle yet deeply meaningful, reflecting a depth of awareness absent in their earlier interactions. After the ceremony, guests gathered in the small courtyard for a reception that was intimate yet joyous. Food was shared, laughter echoed, and stories of transformation and resilience were recounted. Julian shared insights about the challenges faced by immigrants and the importance of ethical leadership, connecting his experiences to the broader themes of accountability and social responsibility. Sophia spoke of perseverance, courage, and community engagement, reinforcing the values that Marcus and Elena now prioritized in both their personal and professional lives. Vanessa, once a figure of conflict and coercion, now stood as a symbol of redemption and accountability. She had found her place within the community, contributing actively to philanthropic and social initiatives. Her presence was a testament to the possibility of transformation when one confronted past mistakes with sincerity, effort, and ethical commitment. Marcus observed the interplay of forgiveness, trust, and accountability, recognizing that reconciliation required not only acknowledgement, but sustained action and integrity. The simple wedding underscored the evolution of Marcus and Elena's relationship, from one of imbalance and misunderstanding to one grounded in equality, mutual respect, and shared purpose. The modesty of the event reinforced the principle that significance was derived not from material grandeur, but from ethical alignment, clarity of intention, and the recognition of each person's autonomy. Every aspect of the ceremony reflected these values, from the venue choice to the interactions with guests. As the evening drew near, Marcus and Elena took a moment alone, standing under the open sky, the vineyard stretching into the distance. Marcus presented Elena with a handwritten note in Italian, a continuation of a tradition that had begun years before, expressing affection, gratitude, and a commitment to equality. Elena smiled, reading the note and responding with a whispered phrase that echoed sentiments of love and recognition that had endured through time, growth, and transformation. The moment was intimate, profound, and emblematic of the partnership they had cultivated. Reflections on the journey were not lost on Marcus. He understood that wealth, status, and power were transient, but integrity, accountability, and respect for agency endured. The collapse of his former empire had provided lessons that no amount of fortune could teach. He had learned that relationships founded on equality, transparency, and principled action were far more enduring than those built on dominance or superficial charm. The night concluded with a quiet celebration, the small group of guests sharing in the joy of a union grounded in ethical alignment, mutual respect, and authentic partnership. Marcus and Elena moved through the crowd, expressing gratitude and appreciation, acknowledging the journeys of those present and reinforcing the values that had guided their path. The atmosphere was one of warmth, reflection, and the quiet affirmation of lessons learned through experience and intentional action. As the final guests departed, Marcus and Elena remained in the courtyard, the stars beginning to emerge in the clear night sky. They spoke softly of plans, shared aspirations, and the importance of sustaining principles of equality, respect, and mutual support in all aspects of their lives. The wedding was not an endpoint but a continuation, a deliberate and conscious choice to live in alignment with the values that had guided their transformation. Vanessa, Julian, and Sophia lingered nearby, participating in the closing moments of reflection and conversation. Their presence underscored the broader community of accountability, growth, and collaboration, demonstrating that personal transformation was inextricably linked to ethical engagement and support of others. Marcus recognized that the network of trust, accountability, and integrity surrounding him was both a foundation and a guide for the life he now sought to cultivate. By the end of the evening, Marcus and Elena stood together, gazing out at the vineyard in the soft glow of the moonlight. They felt a sense of closure, reconciliation, and the quiet power of equality in partnership. Marcus reflected on the lessons learned, that love was strengthened not by control or dominance, but by respect, that redemption required sustained effort and ethical action, and that true partnership celebrated the autonomy, strength, and dignity of both individuals. The simple wedding, intimate and profound, served as a capstone to their journey. It reinforced the values of equality, accountability, and ethical engagement, demonstrating that the collapse of empires and the confrontation with past failures could lead to authentic, enduring connections. Marcus and Elena fully embraced these principles, recognizing that their partnership was now rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and a commitment to act with integrity in all circumstances. As the night deepened and the stars glimmered above, Marcus and Elena walked together, hand in hand, through the vineyard paths. The experience had transformed them, solidifying lessons of love, equality, and accountability. They understood that life would continue to present challenges, yet they were equipped with insight, humility, and shared values to navigate the future together. The simple wedding was not merely a celebration of union, but a living testament to the power of reflection, transformation, and equal love, promising a life defined by integrity, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment to one another.